Hello, modern philosophy students. Today's second lecture, online class period. We'll be talking about your questions and comments, or at least some of your questions and comments on Hume's Enquiry, sections 1 through 3. And we'll also be getting into section 4, where Hume raises problems regarding our reasoning concerning cause and effect, or relations of cause and effect. Before I start getting into responding to student writings and questions and comments, I want to first touch base about upcoming assignments. Let me just point out that Group B students, I'm going to assume right now that Group B students know who you are. Group B students, you are to explain some aspect of Enquiry Section 4 and raise a question or present a problem regarding the issues in Section 4. Those short assignments, again, they're to be no more than 2 pages long. They're due on Friday, April 3 at 8 in the morning. Everyone, all students in this class should read Section 5 and Section 7 of Hume's Enquiry in the next 2 days, and you should watch on Friday my YouTube lecture on Hume's Enquiry, Section 5 and Section 7. And Group C, you will have an assignment due on Monday. Maybe I should just point out Group B students. Who are they? That would be Daniel Kim, Autumn Klein, Dallas McFarland, Zachary Morris, Laura Nide, and Caleb Rigdon. That's the Group B. So those of you in Group B, you will have a short assignment due 8 a.m. Friday. And just send those as attachments to emails to me. Having said that, right, you should have all now seen my online lecture on Hume's Enquiry, sections 1, 2, and 3. And Group A students should have written something about the online lecture and what Hume says. And you should have all seen my outline. Also, if you're watching this, hopefully you've got a copy of my outline on Section 4. I'll be making reference to it today as I talk about Hume Section 4. But before getting into that, I do want to respond to questions and comments that were raised by students regarding Hume sections 1 through 3. I want to start out by looking at something that Sidney Huggins wrote. Sidney Huggins wrote a couple of interesting questions. Some of the things that Huggins said are closely related to things that Henry Hoytia said in his response. Hang on a second. I need to make some adjustments on my computer real quick. Give me a moment here. Good, that will work. All right, let's talk about what Sidney Huggins wrote real quick. Sidney Huggins writes the following: throughout the second section of his Enquiry, Hume talks about the differences between ideas and impressions. Hume says that impressions are what we are gathering by our senses, and to me it seems like these are the things that are directly happening around you. Impressions are happening in real time. Again, all of this is Huggins. Huggins also says, Hume also talks about ideas, which are what occur when you are remembering things or imagining things. The ideas are powerful because you can combine them and make new things as you get more impressions and they turn into ideas. You have more stuff in your memory bank to play around with. One problem I have with this part comes back to problems that also plague the earlier philosophers. The problems of dreams and hallucinations still don't seem to have an answer from Hume. Dreams are made of ideas that are being played around with while you sleep, but they are also happening in real time, so dreams seem like a mix of Hume's two types of perceptions of the mind. Hallucinations seem to be a problem as well because your mind is projecting your ideas outward, but you're also getting an impression from those hallucinations. They seem to be another mix of the two perceptions, and Hume does not seem to provide answers for these problems. But this is an interesting point that Huggins makes. I would point out that according to David Hume, the difference between impressions and ideas has to do with their vivacity, how vivid they are. Hume wants to say that impressions are the more vivid perceptions of the mind, and ideas are the less vivid perceptions of the mind, right? At the same time, Hume seems to want to treat the impressions as though they are caused by things that actually exist, stimulating our sensory apparatus, right? Right now, I've got the vivid experience, the vivid perception of a laptop computer sitting before me. Um, and Hume seems to want to treat that that vivid experience as an impression, right? And as though it's caused by the laptop computer, right? And Huggins raises an interesting point here about hallucinations and dreams, right? I think what Huggins is suggesting is that sometimes our hallucinations are extremely vivid, sometimes our dreams are extremely vivid, and we're led to believe that we're being chased by monsters, or we're being attacked in our dreams, or sometimes we're led to believe in a hallucination. Well, I don't have these sorts of hallucinations, but some people might have very vivid hallucinations that lead them to believe things are going on around them, that are in fact not going on around them. And so, Huggins raises an interesting point here that, we can have vivid perceptions that don't reflect reality. And so how are we to know that our impressions map onto a reality outside of our mind? And Hume does talk in section 2 as though these vivid impressions occur when we're actually experiencing objects external to us. And if the distinction between the impression and the idea is just its vivacity, we might wonder about the reliability of our impressions and letting us know about the nature of the world outside of our minds. I want to go to Hume's section 2 just for a moment here. Yeah, Hume writes, I'm looking at page 317 of section 2. Hume writes, by the term impression, then, I mean all our more lively perceptions when we hear or see or feel or love or hate or desire or will, and impressions are distinguished from ideas, which are the less lively perceptions of which we are conscious when we reflect on any of those sensations or movements above mentioned. So I actually don't know what I want to say about that. Maybe Hume would just be willing to say, well, when you've got a very vivid dream, or when you've got a very vivid hallucination, maybe those just count as impressions. And Hume might just want to say, and look, maybe some of our impressions don't reflect the reality of the world outside our mind. But of course, Huggins still might want to know how are we supposed to know when our impressions reflect the reality. So that problem persists. Maybe Hume will address it more later on. It's an interesting point she raises, I think. Huggins goes on, she says, in section 3, Hume talks about the types of associations of ideas. He presents 3 different types that are said to be how all ideas connect to each other. The first one he discusses is that of resemblance. If one thing looks like another, it's likely that you will be reminded of that other thing just from thinking of the first. The second is contiguity. The association says that if things are near each other or happen near each other, thinking of one is likely to lead to the other. The last is cause and effect. If you think of a cause, you're likely to think of the effect as well, and vice versa. Now, Huggins also writes, the problem I have with this is not entirely clear to me, but it's pretty much that minds move around very rapidly and from thing to thing with seemingly no connection between them. Hume's three types of associations, right, resemblance, contiguity, and cause and effect, they don't seem like enough to explain all types of thought patterns. His examples make perfect sense, but there's a lot more to the world than he seems to explain. Another interesting point from Huggins, and Henry Hoytia, I believe, makes a similar point. In particular, what I take Huggins to be talking about, and what I find interesting here, and again, Henry makes a similar point in his short assignment for today. Huggins seems to want to suggest that there may be other principles for associating our ideas. Hume says there are just three principles for associating ideas: resemblance, contiguity, cause, and effect. And Huggins is sort of wondering, gosh, the mind, Huggins seems to be wondering, gosh, the mind is complex. We do all sorts of things when we're connecting and relating our ideas. And Huggins is sort of suggesting, surely there's some other principles besides resemblance, contiguity, and cause and effect. I'm going to go for a second to what Henry says on this front, because one of the things that Henry does that takes this to another level is Henry suggests what one of these other principles for association might be. So let me go to that point which Henry makes. I'm looking at the second page of Henry's short assignment. Henry writes, while David Hume attempts, and this is again Henry's writing, while David Hume attempts to show that these three are the only links between ideas and any other may be a combination of the three, Henry says, I believe that there may be other principles for associating ideas. Henry says category, for example, is one idea that belongs to a subset of another, and by bringing up either the idea of the category or the idea belonging to the category, other ideas within the category may be connected. Henry writes, for example, the idea of a spring may relate to physics, which may lead to the idea of science, which may lead to the idea of biology, which can then lead to the idea of cells. While the idea of a spring falls under the category of physics, and while the idea of the spring may lead one to think of physics, well, just the idea of physics may lead to the idea of science, which physics falls under the category of science, which may lead to the idea of cell biology. And this may, right? Henry goes on and says the more abstract ideas of biology, science, and physics seem to be a conglomeration of other ideas rather than discrete ideas in themselves, and so it seems that they would not be connected through cause and effect nor contiguity. Henry suggests resemblance could be a possible connection, however, as the two are conglomerations of ideas that are relatively similar, so perhaps Hume might be correct after all. So that's interesting. I mean, Henry's suggesting that maybe if you've got an idea that falls under one category, it can lead you to think of another category. And maybe category can be a principle for associating ideas. But then Henry interestingly suggests at the same time, but maybe ideas that fall within a category actually are ideas that have resemblance to each other. And so maybe Hume would respond by saying, well, this new principle for relating ideas of category is really just an instance of Hume's principle of resemblance. Nonetheless, just thinking about this, both Henry and Huggins, they do seem to be suggesting something that is plausible, that maybe there are even more natural principles for associating ideas than resemblance, contiguity, and cause and effect. Um, and, when I think about this, let me just say, I mean, David Hume, he settles on those three. But, it might be that Hume, he might be open-minded about this. Hume, he probably thinks that we could reduce all of, he probably would want to say that we could reduce any other proposed principles for associating ideas. He might want to say we could reduce them to those three principles of contiguity, resemblance, and cause and effect. And maybe, as Henry suggested, category could be reduced to resemblance. But nonetheless, Hume might be open-minded. Maybe Hume would be willing to admit that there's, with proper evidence, that there might be some other principles for natural principles for associating ideas. So that is an interesting suggestion. My time's growing short. I would like to respond to some of the other comments that I've seen. Maybe I'll just talk about one other. Samuel Jackson. He suggested something interesting. Let me see if I can get Samuel Jackson's assignment to come up. I'm waiting for Sam Jackson's short assignment to come up. I'm not always going to be able to respond to everybody's short assignments, by the way. Samuel Jackson. It's something about last paragraph of Samuel Jackson's short assignment. Samuel Jackson writes, I do have an objection to one part of Hume's theory. Samuel Jackson says, my objection is to the statements Hume makes in his theory on the origins of our ideas. Hume says that you can have no idea of something that you have no impression of. I believe this to be false, says Jackson. So Jackson thinks that you can have the idea of something that you have no impression of. Jackson writes, for example, someone could write a book on all the impressions or sensations of a glass of wine, right? Or all the impressions or sensations a glass of wine can give a person. If a person who has never experienced wine were to pick up this book and read it, would they not be able to draw some similarities to impressions they already have, which would give them some idea of a glass of wine? If this is true, then anyone can have ideas of something they have no first-hand experience or impressions of. I'm not arguing that the blind can see no colors or that the deaf can experience sound, because their physical condition of blindness or deafness will likely not be changed. But I am saying that a person can create an idea of an object or sensation, even if they have no direct personal impression or sensation of said object. Hume explores this idea in his third inquiry with principles of resemblance, contiguity, and cause and effect. This is an interesting point by Sam Jackson, I think. Hume writes, I'm looking at page 318 of Hume's Enquiry. This is section 2. Hume writes, he makes a claim that a person who lives in an area of the world where they don't have wine, where they don't make or have any wine at all, he says that such person has no notion, has no idea of the relish of wine, right? And I think I used that example in my outline for last time. So Hume thinks, like, if you're living in a part of the world where they don't sell or distribute wine, you can have no idea of the taste of wine. And in a way, it strikes me that Samuel Jackson's challenging this. Samuel Jackson seems to want to suggest, surely you can have some idea of wine, even if you live in some other part of the world. But notice it may be significant that Hume says that if you live in a part of the world where they don't have wine, you have no idea of the relish of wine. The relish of wine here, I believe, is the taste of wine. Um, and, Hume may want to push back here, and Hume might want to say, well, if you've never tasted wine, you can't have the idea of the taste of wine. At the same time, maybe Jackson's on to something here. I mean, suppose that you're living in a part of the world where they don't have wine, but they have grape juice, unfermented grape juice. Maybe Jackson will want to say that, well, if you tasted grape juice, you could have some idea of the taste of wine, right? And so, maybe Jackson's onto something here. At the same time, maybe Jackson's being a little bit unfair to Hume because, notice Hume wants to say all of our ideas are derived from prior impressions. Admittedly, I think Hume is a little bit sloppy because in some places he uses the term are derived from impressions. Other times he talks about our copies of impressions. But if I can derive an idea from a prior impression, well, that derivation may not, right? Like, so I might have a derived idea of wine from the impression of the taste of grapes or from the impression of the taste of grape juice. And so I could maybe have some derived idea of wine, but it wouldn't be as accurate of an idea of wine if it's just based on the impression of grape juice or the taste of grapes. So anyway, there's an interesting issue there. Again, if Hume, Hume again might want to say that you could have some idea, but then Hume might want to say, but you could perhaps have an inaccurate or imperfect idea of wine that derived from the experience of the taste of grapes or derived from the experience of the taste of grape juice. But it wouldn't be a very accurate idea of wine. But you could have some idea of wine from that. Nonetheless, look, I'm sorry. I know I had other short assignments from Boudwani and Joseph Bass, and I have things to say about those, but I think I should turn to Section 4. And so let us talk about Section 4. It's a very famous part of Hume's Enquiry. It raises some really deep issues regarding causation and our scientific understanding of the world. So let's start by talking about relations of ideas and matters of fact. And then now I'm working with the outline that I sent to you all. Hume says, and so, it'd be good if you could open up a window where you've got the outline, open up a window on your computer and open up a window where you can maybe listen to me and watch me talk through this. But David Hume says all knowledge comes in two basic varieties: relations of ideas on the one hand and matters of fact on the other. Relations of ideas, these are conceptual truths which can be known to be true just by understanding the concepts involved in them. They do not require any empirical or observational evidence to know them. Some examples of relations of ideas would be things like 2 + 2 = 4, squares are four-sided figures, or all bachelors are male. Let me just say a little bit more here, right? The idea here is that, look, if you understand the concept of 2, you understand the concept of addition, you understand the concept of equality and the concept of 4. If you understand the concepts involved in the statement 2 + 2 = 4, you will be able to see without any empirical evidence that that's a true statement just by understanding the concepts. Or if you understand the concept of a square and you understand the concept of four-sided figure, you will be able to see without having to empirically observe squares that all squares are four-sided figures, right? Or for instance, thinking about something that Descartes talked about, a chiliagon, which is a 1,000 sided figure. Trust me, I have never seen a 1,000 sided figure, but if I understand what a chiliagon is, if I understand that concept, I will know immediately that all chiliagons are a 1,000 sided figure, because it's inherent to the very concept of a chiliagon that it is a 1,000 sided figure. Now, relations of ideas, another point about them, right? As I've said, they're definitional truths or conceptual truths. They provide necessary truths. Relations of ideas cannot possibly be false. Now, on the other hand, there are matters of fact. Matters of fact, they're not mere conceptual truths. Knowing them requires empirical evidence. Some examples of matter of fact claims: hitting windows with rocks causes them to break. There is a television set in the room. The earth revolves around the sun. Those are all matter-of-fact claims, and to know the truth of those claims requires having some empirical observational evidence. Matter-of-fact claims are contingent truths. While they are true, the world could have been such that they are false, right? Here's a matter-of-fact claim. There's a television set in the room in which I sit. The world could have been such that there was no television set, right? But as a matter of fact, there is one, and I know that there is one by seeing the television set, okay? Now, Hume, after making this distinction between relations of ideas and matters of fact, he goes on to raise questions about how we are justified in forming beliefs concerning matters of fact. And it's a very famous argument that he makes, and it concerns causal thinking and the justification for our causal thinking. And what Hume has to say on this really raises some interesting questions about the nature of science, because the science deals with causal claims, and it deals with causal laws of how the world operates. But I want to start by, again, I'm working with this outline, and hopefully you can look at it as I talk about this. The main argument that Hume makes that raises questions about the justification of our beliefs concerning matters of fact, it runs like this, the main argument. Hume makes point one: all beliefs concerning matters of fact are based on causal reasoning. Point two: there can be no rational justification for such causal reasoning or such causal thinking. Therefore, there can be no rational justification for our beliefs concerning matters of fact. Notice, right, if there can be no rational justification for our beliefs concerning matters of fact, and if knowledge requires rational justification for what we believe in, then knowledge concerning matters of fact is thrown into skeptical doubt here, right? And Hume is quite clear that all of our beliefs concerning matters of fact are based on causal thinking. If you look at page 324 of Hume's Enquiry in our textbook, 323, Hume says quite clearly, middle of the page, all reasonings concerning matter of fact seem to be founded on the relation of cause and effect. If you go to page 330 in part 2 of section 4, Hume says, I say then that even after we have experience of the operations of cause and effect, our conclusions from that experience are not, I'm looking at the wrong page. Sorry about that. Page 330, Hume says, all right, 330 down towards the bottom, all arguments concerning existence are founded on the relation of cause and effect, that our knowledge of that relation is derived entirely from experience, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, So there you have the main argument. All beliefs concerning matters of fact are based on causal reasoning. There can be no rational justification for such reasons, so there can be no rational justification for our beliefs concerning matters of fact. Um, I'm willing to grant Hume the assumption that all beliefs concerning matters of fact are based on causal reasoning. Maybe I shouldn't grant him that. It seems somewhat plausible. I mean, think about this. Right now, I've got the belief that there's a computer beside me. Now, what leads me, right? And the belief that there's a computer beside me, that's a matter of fact claim. It's not something that's definitionally true. Why do I believe that? Well, I've got the impression of there being, right? I've got the impression of there being a computer beside me, right? And what's going on here is causal thinking's involved here, right? Because what leads me to believe that there's a computer beside me, which is a matter of fact claim, is that I presume that there is a computer beside me that causes the impression I have of the computer, right? I believe that if I throw a baseball at the window over here as hard as I can, and I believe that if that baseball strikes the window will break. Well, that belief is based on the experiences I've had in the past of windows striking and breaking windows. I'm sorry, of baseball striking windows and breaking them. Right? And so my matter-of-fact belief that if I throw a baseball now at that window, it will break the window. It's based on past experiences of baseball striking windows and windows breaking. And that's a species of causal thinking, you see. So I think it's true that, well, or at least it's plausible that all beliefs concerning matters of fact are based on causal reasoning. But Hume has this other claim that there can be no rational justification for causal thinking. Now, why does he say that? Hume has a lot more to say about that if you follow me on the outline. So what's the argument for the claim that there can be no rational justification for our causal reasoning or our causal thinking? Well, to get at this, we have to understand what it means to say that one thing X causes something else Y. Hume says that where X and Y are events, to say X causes Y means that whenever X occurs, Y will occur. But for any X and Y, we are never rationally justified in believing that whenever X occurs, Y will occur. Therefore, for any X and Y, we're never rationally justified in believing that X causes Y. Right? I think it's safe to say that to say X causes Y means that whenever the one event X occurs, then Y will occur, right? If I say that releasing the pin into air on the planet Earth causes it to fall, right? What I mean is that whenever I release a pin into the air on planet Earth, where gravitational forces are strongly operative, the pin will fall, right? And so, right, since releasing the pin into air on Earth causes it to fall, that, right, and if I say that, what I mean is the next time I release the pin, it will fall as well, right? But Hume wants to say that we're never rationally justified in believing that whenever one event X occurs, the releasing, it will be followed by a falling. We're never justified in believing that sort of thing. So then the question arises, though, why does he say that we're never justified in believing that whenever one event X will occur, then Y will occur? Hume has things to say about this. Look at the next step in the chain of argument, right? Why does Hume assert that for any events X and Y, when we are never rationally justified in believing that whenever X occurs, Y will occur? Well, he says, the only possible way to rationally justify whenever X occurs, Y will occur, is to note that X's have always been followed by Y's in the past, and to two, justifiably assume that the future will resemble the past. But there's no way to rationally justify the assumption that the future will resemble the past. Therefore, we are never rationally justified in believing that whenever X occurs, Y will occur. right? Right? The only possible way for me to justify the claim that whenever I release the pin, it will fall involves noting that whenever I've released the pin in the past, it has fallen. But then I also have to have a justified assumption that the future will resemble the past. I have to justifiably assume that when I release the pin in the future, the same thing will happen. It will fall, right? And Hume says there's no way to rationally justify the assumption that the future will resemble the past. Now then the question arises, why is it that there's no way to rationally justify the assumption that the future will resemble the past? Go to the outline, the last little argument here. Hume says, look, all knowledge is either conceptually true relations of ideas or empirically justified matters of fact. The assertion that the future will resemble the past, it's not a conceptual truth, nor is an empirically verifiable matter of fact. Therefore, there's no way to rationally justify the assumption that the future will resemble the past. And look, if there's no way to rationally justify the assumption that the future will resemble the past, then there's not going to be any way to rationally justify the belief that whenever one thing X occurs, Y will occur. And if there's no way to justify the claim that whenever X occurs, Y will occur, and since that's essential to any causal claim, it's going to follow that there's no way to rationally justify any of our causal beliefs. And if there's no way to rationally justify any of our causal beliefs, and if all matter-of-fact claims are based on causal thinking, then there's not going to be any way to justify any of our matter-of-fact claims, such as there's a television set in the room, water boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit, pinching the crap out of Lamos will cause him pain, etc. So these are serious problems regarding all of our beliefs concerning matters of fact. And Hume's thesis seems to be leading into a significant skepticism, or so it seems. I want to back up to this last point here. Let's go back to the very last argument I spoke of a moment ago. Hume says all knowledge is either conceptually true relations of ideas or empirically justified matters of fact. Then Hume says the assertion that the future will resemble the past is not a conceptual truth, right? There's nothing in the concept of the future that entails that it must resemble the past, right? It's perfectly conceivable. It doesn't seem, it's not likely in any of our minds that a minute from now the world will operate completely differently, right? Nobody thinks that's likely, right? But it's at least conceivable that the world might start operating in completely different ways 1 minute or 2 minutes from now, right? But of course, nobody believes that it will, but it is conceivable, right? And there's nothing in the concept of the future that requires that it resemble the past, right? So it's not a conceptual truth that the future will resemble the past. But then Hume says the claim that the future will resemble the past is not empirically verifiable either. Now we might ask, why is it not empirically verifiable? And I think Hume's point is because it's the future. We don't have experience of the future. All that we have experience of is what's going on right now and what has happened in the past, and we have no experience of the future. So the claim that the future will resemble the past, since it is a claim about the future and we have no empirical evidence of the future, we can't have empirical evidence that the future will resemble the past. And so if we can't have empirical evidence that the future will resemble the past, and if it's not a conceptual truth that the future will resemble the past, it looks like we cannot justify the claim that the future will resemble the past. But again, all of our causal claims are based on the presumption that the future will resemble the past, because all of our causal claims entail that whenever one event X occurs, then Y will occur. Again, I believe that when I release the pin on planet Earth where gravitational forces are operative, I believe that when I release a pin, it causes it to fall. But what does that belief amount to? It's a belief that whenever pins are released on planet Earth, they fall. But to say that whenever pins on planet Earth are released, they will fall, means that when they're released in the future, they will fall. But if I cannot justify the claim that when pins are released in the future, they will fall, then I cannot justify the causal claim that releasing the pin causes it to fall. And if I cannot rationally justify my causal claims, and if all matter of fact claims, right, all non-conceptual truths about the world depend on causal thinking, then we're left here with a puzzle about how we're to justify any of our claims about matters of fact. And this is a significant problem. Science, whether physics, chemistry, or biology, makes all manner of matter-of-fact claims about how the world operates. Science is full of causal claims, causal laws, and Hume's argument throws into doubt the rationality and the rational justification for all of these beliefs concerning matters of fact. So then, how's Hume going to make sense of the nature of our scientific understanding of the world, given the face of this challenge that he's made, a very famous challenge that he's made for our causal thinking in Hume's Enquiry, Section 4? Well, that's why we go on to Section 5. That's why we'll talk about Section 7. Hume will talk about what it is that does lead us to believe in causal relations and what it is that does lead us to believe in our matter-of-fact claims. And he'll have things to say about that in Section 5 and Section 7, and that's what I want you guys to read about for Friday. And I will talk about Section 5 and Section 7 in my next lecture, which will be posted on Friday. And I will want Group B, I want you guys to write about and raise some questions or problems regarding Section 4 for next time. You guys take care, and be safe. Practice social distancing. Have a good day. Bye-bye.